What if I told you that there is a psychological war going on between companies and the consumers they sell to? Companies are able to employ slight psychological manipulations and tricks to hijack your cognitive biases and your intuition. So how do we defend against it? Hello, my name is Kevin Carr, and I talk about business, software, and psychology. So what exactly is a dark pattern? According to the journal article Shining a Light on Dark Patterns by Jamie Lugari and Lior Jacob Strahilovitz, dark patterns are user interfaces whose designers knowingly confuse users, make it difficult for users to express their actual preferences, or manipulate users into taking certain actions. They typically exploit cognitive biases and prompt online consumers to purchase goods and services they do not want, or to reveal personal information they would prefer not to disclose. Essentially, these corporations and companies are able to get you to do exactly what they want by utilizing these psychological tactics and nudges. How do we know exactly what is in that inventory or tools to basically psychologically manipulate us? And how effective are these dark patterns? According to this study, when mild dark patterns were utilized, they were twice as effective compared to neutral patterns, and aggressive dark patterns were 4 times, quadruple the amount more likely to be effective in getting the end consumer to do what the company wanted. And the best way to defend against this is actually to identify and learn what these dark patterns are and how they effectively short circuit our decision making, because a lot of decision making is emotional. When we use that intuition, we have to be clear that we're using more of what's known as a system 1 thinking. So where does this term come from? System 1 thinking, or more intuitive, emotional based decision making, was more prominently highlighted in Daniel Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow. You can also learn about other cognitive biases in Robert Cialdini's book Influence. Knowing is half the battle. Knowing your foibles and cognitive biases, and also knowing our natural blind spots, is a very important tool you can use in order to defend yourself against these little psychological nudges, especially when you're shopping for things. The one thing you want to understand is, based on the leverage and scalability of these e-commerce platforms and even software in general, a lot of companies have leverage and scalability to run what is known as A/B testing. So what is A/B testing? A/B testing is basically putting a sample size or just a group of people into two groups, group A and group B. You basically just make one single change, whether it be in the software or how something is marketed, or maybe how a user interface component is used, and then seeing how more effective that change is in getting or achieving a certain goal or metric. For example, let's say you want to increase user engagement or lead to a higher amount of sales. You might change how a button is worded on your UI form. Now, where this is get tricky is you can almost compare it to how effective an AI chess system is. An AI chess system can play millions and millions of games in a fraction of time that a grandmaster or the world's best chess players can. Now, imagine that same imbalance or asymmetry between just a normal, unsophisticated consumer like you or I. They're able to run these thousands of tests in very cost-effective ways. Very minuscule for them to change and A/B test on different groups of consumers. So they know what's more effective. So they're essentially playing more and more games. You can think about it either like poker, chess. They basically are able to get more experience in a fraction of the time, and while you're just buying an item or a product from time to time. So they're able to refine these psychological tactics in order to get you to reach their desired goal, which might mean buying more products, spending more time on the website. And one thing I also want to highlight is just basically an inventory of these dark patterns. So what are some of the most common dark patterns? And this is where it gets really tricky, is with all these dark patterns, the more subtle or mild dark patterns and combinations or cumulative effects of these dark patterns, basically they are subtle and go under the radar. So it's actually easier to influence you when it's not as obvious. When there's more aggressive dark patterns, that's where it leads to backlash and leads to a loss of consumer goodwill. So if they try to use too many of these psychological tactics, then the consumer knows what's up. The consumer knows when they're having a bad deal. Now where it gets, again, really tricky in these more subtle and mild dark patterns is you might not even recognize you're being slightly influenced. It's all about them trying to engineer certain incentives for themselves against what you would naturally want or prefer. And we actually have a good example with the Roach Motel. I'm sure we've all signed up for a service and it is impossible to actually cancel it. A good example is these newspapers like Wall Street Journal or New York Times. It is so easy to sign up for these services. They actually make it pretty cheap to entice the potential subscriber to sign up for the service. Hey, $1 for 4 months. But in order to actually cancel, you have to click on multiple windows and then call them to cancel. So it's a click of a button to actually sign up, but you actually have that friction in order to have to call a representative on having to cancel your subscription. And then while you're going through that cancellation of your newspaper subscription, they'll try to entice you and basically build barriers for you to actually cancel it. Hey, have you heard about this offer? What if we offer you the same price for the whole year? And basically it's a pain where you have to go through their script in order to actually cancel a service you no longer want. And with the Roach Motel, like the big highlight there is it's super easy to get inside, but it's really hard to get out or cancel the service. So what are the most effective dark patterns? According to the study, the most effective dark patterns against consumers are hidden information. So this hidden information is basically, like I mentioned before, smaller print, grayed out, very hard to read in comparison to brightly colored buttons that might encourage you to select an option that is good for the company, maybe less good for the consumer and your preferences. Also, obstruction. So basically having consumers jump through a series of hoops in order to get to their desired action. So again, in terms of actually canceling a subscription, you might have to go through 3 to 5 UI forms in order to either cancel a service or disable autopay, for an example. Others that are more nefarious are trick questions, right? That seems more deceptive to me, but it's basically wording something in a way that is, again, not beneficial or helping the consumer. And then finally, a big one, again, highlighted in the book Influence by Robert Cialdini, is social proof. So what is social proof? Social proof is basically when you see something that someone else likes or wants, it makes you more likely to want it as well. So you can think about this in simple terms as popularity. We want things that are desired by others. Basically, because of cognitive biases and our blind spots psychologically, we are able to save the mental resources in evaluating a person or product and just trusting that someone did the work for us. So if someone thinks it's popular, it must be good. So understanding these cognitive biases and psychological traits we have due to our biology is important to understand because it can be hacked. Again, to tie it all together is to realize that we have these psychological foibles and buttons that can be pressed by other people and we can be influenced. How do we defend ourselves against this? Again, knowledge of these patterns is important, but most importantly, realizing whenever you are purchasing or engaging in commerce with services you might use, just realize that there are these little psychological tricks that might get you to try to buy something that you don't want. And this is really important because, again, the companies have an advantage, an asymmetric advantage against you because they can A/B test and really refine these customized psychological tools that can actually be customized and specialized to a particular consumer or person. So just realize that these psychological nudges exist and you can defend yourself by just knowing about it. The more you aware you are, the more you can kind of duck and cover like a fighter. Thank you guys for watching the video and see you next week.